Yeah, I mean, when you have a fight between him and like Vosh or fucking Unruhe or any of these dickheads, I mean, it's not so much dunking. It's more like one of them's bowling no balls and the other's hitting his own wicket. Like he's not wearing his he's not cosplaying middle school vice principal this time. He's cosplaying middle school vice principal who got fired for selling weed. What? Okay, does he know where his camera is set up? Why is he staring at the microphone? What is this, like, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well?
He dressed so amazingly to make this video. It's very short, and it's very wrong on a number of points.
So, I mean, the difference between him and Jason Unruhe apparently is that it's very short when he does it. But they both have in common that they're very wrong on a lot of points.
So we're going to have a little bit of fun with the great Jason Unruhe and his critique of my defense of the Dutch farmers.
Okay, first of all, Dutch farmers is a bit funny because these are the people who employ Dutch farmers. This is not, I mean, we're not talking about fucking peasants here. We're talking about large landowners.
Regulations on the rich, and you say, no, could you please buy this fertilizer? Okay, now...
This is like Ed Grimley goes off the grid. Well, he used to work for Orty. Now Orty America's gone, which is why he seems to have started up this whole new grift, the Communist Placebo Initiative. CPI.
You have to buy this fertilizer that has less of an issue with causing the destruction of the planet, and it's a little bit more expensive. They throw a fit because their profit margins won't be as big as they were.
Actually, Jason, the reason their profit margins are going to be not as good is because they're going to put out less produce.
That's not what a profit margin is, actually. I mean, the margin isn't necessarily less because you put out less stuff. The margin is the amount that is left over from your revenue after you deduct the costs. That's not... Okay, so already... I was remarking recently on Twitter that you never hear Caleb Maupin talking... When he'll talk about, like, Marx and Engels talking about, you know, the irrational organization of production and stuff like that. He never gets into really what that means or how he wants to see things done rationally. But the one thing you never hear him really talking about is exactly how surplus value works, the issues with wage labor, basically any of the liberatory workplace stuff that Marx and Engels ever wrote about. And when he doesn't know the difference between profits and profit margins, you can tell he just really doesn't. He probably never read any of it.
And that seems to be the issue. And there's some other issues too. Okay. And that seems to be the issue. And there's some other issues too.
Good way to explain abolition of private property, somebody asks. And it disappears before I had to pause it just to see that. Because I have a feeling that we're never going to hear more about that.
Okay. Writing it down. But the issue is that their crop output is going to go down. I don't know if you've noticed Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka, you know, they were forced by BlackRock, which is a investment firm in the United States and in Britain. They were forced by them to go organic in order to get their credit rating better, their green credit rating better. And so they went organic, and the result was a much lower crop output, and it led to a whole big problem in the country. I don't know if you're aware of this. So, you know...
Well, how does anyone think the men protesting are peasants? I don't think anyone seriously does. I mean, it's all the usual right-wing shitlords who've shown up to defend them. I mean, fucking, Muppet here. Also, the fake-ass trucker convoy in Canada, he stand that too.
These kind of environmental policies, in a lot of cases, they result in the amount of food that farmers grow decreasing. And that is definitely going to cut into their profit margins. You bet it will. It'll also
Again, not the same thing. Profit margin and profit's not the same thing.
reduce the amount of food that's on the market.
The thing about the amount of food that's on the market is if the total amount of food that's produced actually made it to the market, there would be enough food for us to feed 3 billion more people than are even on the fucking planet right now. Half of that gets thrown away before anyone ever gets a chance to use it. With the result that we go from massive overproduction of food to not actually having enough that's retailing to actually feed everybody on the planet. So, I mean, we do not have a problem with not enough food production in the first place. We would actually probably do well if we produced less, but actually made everything available that was produced and was actually, edible. Then we would be better off, and the food would be cheaper.
And we're having a global food crisis right now, Jason. I don't know if you're aware of this, but malnutrition-related deaths in Africa have significantly gone up since the pandemic.
Yes, and the thing is that none of that has to do with there not being enough food in the world. There is again, massive overproduction of food. It just isn't doing any good to people in Africa and Sri Lanka and, large amount, and a lot of Latin America and a lot of other places because they can't fucking afford it.
I don't know if you're aware of this, Jason, but because of the fight in Ukraine, Russia's ability to export its grain is being limited. Ukraine's crop output is going down. There's going to be a global food crisis. Now, you and I, Jason,
the Ukraine's grain output might partially be going down because they're having to fucking fight a war on the same territory they'd normally be farming that shit. It occurs to me that maybe that's also had an adverse effect. I mean, and then actually the sanctions on Russia have also done their part to make everything pretty untenable. Because a lot of people and a lot of workers, a lot of farmers in Latin America do business with Russia. I mean, they export to Russia. And now that Russia's been cut off from the global financial system, they're not getting paid.
We live in the first world, so we're probably going to be okay. But in Africa, where there's already limited access to food, people are going to die because of this.
Africa, it's worth noting, exports food. It's cash crop export. If they were dedicating their agricultural lands to feeding their own people rather than exporting cash crops to us, they'd probably be doing okay right now. Yeah. Yeah, he is incapable of not speaking condescendingly. He always talks like you're a 12-year-old who's been kept after class.
So the last thing that any country on the world should be doing right now is trying to figure out how to reduce crop output. So the fact that these Dutch farmers are having policies imposed on them that will reduce the amount of crops they're putting out, and that they're taking farmland away from these farmers, right? They're reducing the amount of farmland overall,
taking farmland away from large landowners? See, last time I heard that was something that communists actually kind of like. I mean, I'm not familiar with this aspect of the plan, and maybe this isn't actually the case. Yeah, he doesn't know shit about this. Every time he gets into the subject of food production and overproduction and degrowth, he shows that he has absolutely no fucking idea what he's talking about. Because the issue is simply not that there's not enough food being produced. It hasn't been. There's plenty of food production going on. It's just that a huge amount of the world's population can't afford it. And then a huge amount of arable land in the third world is earmarked for cash crop export, which is often a condition of like structural adjustment programs for IMF loans and things like that. I mean, like in Chile, for example, they're having a water crisis that has a whole lot to do with the fact that you have these politically connected farmers. I mean, Caleb would probably tell you that they were the legitimate representatives of the working class, but they basically use all the fucking water so that communities like Petorca they can't do any of their small they can't do any of their small agriculture, and they've often not got water to drink because a guy by the name of Perez Yoma, who's also a politician and whose father Edmundo Perisujovic was a minister of the interior, a home secretary under Frei, the last president before Allende, and massacred workers in Puerto Montt who were demonstrating for land to live on. And all that, he's growing avocados, and he's growing avocados for export. And that's a big part of the fucking problem.
No, I think that's a little bit of a problem. And I know you just want us to hate them because they're rich. We're supposed to hate these farmers because they're rich, but...
Well, I mean, yeah, there is that.
I think the issue is they're going to produce less food, and that ain't good.
They're not producing the food in the first place. The workers they employ, who are often like Eastern European workers who are getting shit wages, who are often not, they're generally not informed of their fucking trade union rights. They just get completely screwed over, are doing the actual agricultural work.
That ain't good. Continue, Jason.
So, naturally...
See, I mean, the color coordination you can't fault here. Because look at this, I think the color of his jacket there is the same color red as the background of his Antifaschistische Aktion flag there.
When you have the rich complaining about not making enough money, you have Pat Socks jumping on them, defending them.
Well, he's not wrong. That is exactly, I mean, great timing there, Caleb, for you to be just sort of defending the rich, and then you have fucking... I think you were supposed to be dunking on him, Caleb. You just set it up so he would dunk on you in your own fucking video.
And then turning around saying, "Oh, look, here's a workers' thing, and once again, leftists are looking for a way to stand against it or oppose it."
It's not about the class nature of those farmers, Jason.
Yeah, it kind of is, though. I mean, see, this is the guy... it's interesting that all of a sudden he's talking about it's not about the class nature. When it's anything else that he doesn't want to talk about, then suddenly it does become about the class nature of something or other. And anything... like his argument for why communists should stand as on the sidelines and sneer at the struggle for abortion rights is that it isn't strictly class struggle as he understands it, and therefore it is liberalism. But here he is, coming out on the other side of the class struggle right here, and now he's saying, oh, yeah, it's not about class.
It's about the fact that their output is going to go down during a food crisis, my friend.
It is not a crisis of output, you dickhead.
When there is a global problem of food shortages and people are going to die of malnutrition, generally you want there to be more food, not less. I know we're supposed to hate these farmers because they're rich. Someone else told me that some of them did business in apartheid South Africa or something like that. Again, the issue is people around the world are going to starve.
People around the world are not the ones who are fucking eating... I mean, does he not understand the way, like, world agricultural markets even work? people around the world aren't eating whatever the fuck they're making in the Netherlands. I mean, like, when they're exporting cheese and beer, yeah, I guess then. Although I bet they even import their hops. I'm just guessing there. I don't really know for sure, so don't quote me on that. But that's not, I mean, the Netherlands is not feeding the world. The Netherlands is mostly going to be, I mean, apart from some of their major exports, again, cheese being a big one, they're not feeding the world. They're like, most of one of their major exports for agricultural produce is Germany. Germany's not fucking starving. Like, does he think that people in like Burundi and Ghana are like, oh shit, the Dutch farmers are going on strike. How will we ever eat? How will we ever get our shitty watery tomatoes? Like, does he understand anything about this? Africa's exporting to these countries. That's a big part of why there's a food crisis in Africa.
That the USA has created a global food crisis with its attacks on Russia and with BlackRock pushing these green policies that drive food production down. And now they're forcing these farmers to give up a lot of their land. They're forcing these farmers to use fertilizer that is less effective. It's not going to grow as many crops, and they're going to have less food to put out there. And we're in the middle of a global food crisis. That's the issue, Jason.
Now, I'm kind of wondering. Yeah, cheese, beer, and chocolate. I didn't even look it up, but I mean, just knowing from what I've seen in supermarkets on 3 different continents, when I see stuff from the Netherlands, it is always those 3 things. It's, I mean, mostly cheese and beer. Like, and, I mean, you do get produce exported from the Netherlands if you're in Germany. In fact, they joke about it. They call the tomatoes that you get from the Netherlands Niederländische Wasserbomben, Dutch depth charges, because Wasserbombe, which means depth charges, water bomb, because these tomatoes are full of water and are famous for being totally fucking flavorless.
That's not what's happening. When the rich are throwing a fit because they don't want to have to give a damn about the planet, that's not Malthusianism. You know, that...
Yeah.
Okay. He's gotten much better at editing people out of context, because I have a feeling that Unruhe will have said more about these things than this. He's just, he used to do a much worse job at that. I have a feeling that he may even have pointed out the issue of food overproduction.
It's the ultra-rich that are pushing these policies, Jason. You do know that these policies are also being implemented by rich people, right? Yes, some of these farmers are rich.
So it's a conflict between rich people. It is a conflict between sectors of the ruling class. And when sectors of the ruling class are fighting, Caleb, the communist position is that you hope they both win. You help them both destroy each other, and then you just take over what's left.
Rich. However, Bill Gates is also rich. BlackRock is also rich. The owners of the...
And Bill Gates is worried about profit margins from vaccines, which is why he torpedoed the idea of open sourcing the Oxford vaccine, which ultimately became AstraZeneca. I mean, obviously, we should totally be on the side of Bill Gates, basically successfully arguing to impose vaccine apartheid, as the WHO has referred to it, on the majority of the planet in the middle of a global pandemic. Obviously, that's a great thing, because they're defending their profit margins, and apparently that's what communists are supposed to be worried about. Like, he used to do a much better job, I think, of pretending to be a communist. I mean, now he just doesn't even sound...
The World Business Forum, the World Economic Forum, they're also rich. Most of the people pushing for degrowth are very, very rich. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Most of the people profiting from massive overproduction that is literally rendering the planet uninhabitable are actually the richest motherfuckers on the planet. The reason there is no meaningful climate response in the US is precisely because the rich people were not supposed to hate because they're rich or whatever. No, their profits would go down. In fact, their entire economic model could not function in a way that is consistent with maintaining a livable ecology. And that's why it's off the fucking table in the country, in one of the most, I don't know if it's the biggest polluter, but it's certainly way up there in the world.
Yes, these farmers are rich, but the people trying to restrict their crop output are also very, very rich, and probably
nobody's trying to restrict their crop output. It's to be clear. I mean, the issue is not restricting these people's crop output; is that they are being asked to use a different kind of fertilizer. Now, that might restrict their crop output, but the thing is, nobody who is in the downline of that crop output is actually experiencing a food crisis. And again, it's simply not a crisis of shortages in that sense. It's a crisis of the majority of roughly 50% of what's being made is simply being destroyed. And of course, it doesn't. The war in Ukraine certainly is not helping matters.
probably a lot
the US
richer.
sanctions certainly aren't either.
So continue, Jason.
This word that you use to describe everything it is that you don't like. This is not degrowth. This is...
Yeah, and he's right. This is not degrowth. I mean, look at this. I mean, what he said there, just in case anyone missed it, because he sort of cut him off in the middle of the sentence and then brought him back later on in the sentence several minutes later. He's saying Malthusianism is the word Caleb uses to describe everything he doesn't like. And yeah, that's right. I mean, that's like what he describes, what he uses to describe any remotely Marxian read of how an economy works, in fact.
It's not degrowth. So these farmers who grow food are having
That's not the growth we're talking about, you dickhead.
policies imposed on them that will result in them growing less food. The amount of food being produced will go down. This is not degrowth.
No, it is not necessarily. That in itself is not degrowth.
What is degrowth if it's not the amount of growth going down?
Jesus Christ, do you not know what any of these words mean? That's not what growth means. We're not talking about literally growing things. It refers to increases in economic activity over time. That's the growth we're talking about. Increases in all economic activity viewed as an aggregate over time is what growth is. And the degrowth we're talking about is simply decreasing the amount of economic activity as an aggregate rather than increasing it. Doing it in a systematic way, specifically in order to cut down on things like overproduction, the use of fossil fuels, all that sort of shit, and potentially, in its anti-capitalist iterations, also to not hyper exploit the workers quite so fucking much. He literally does not know when any of these fucking this guy manages to have this whole wonkish personality. He puts on his crappy suit. He goes out there and he talks condescendingly, and he does not know what any of these fucking words mean. He does not know what any of these fucking words mean. It is amazing.
It's not degrowth. Boy.
literally trying to save the planet from global warming. That scientifically proven fact that you don't believe in because you're actually a rightist pretending to be a leftist.
And not pretending very much anymore. I mean, I haven't heard him actually say anything that is even fake communist in this video.
Now, of course, we would have this problem with the Panthers because they do pretend to be socialists when in fact they keep supporting not only right-wing organizations, but right-wing viewpoints as well. And
Jesus, this is very uncomfortable for me. I always end up in uncomfortable positions when dealing with Caleb Maupin, because Caleb Maupin requires me, despite not actually being a Marxist, though I have a lot of respect for Marxist work and there's a lot of it that I rely on regularly, to, like, set the record straight on Marxism. He, despite not being even remotely a Marxist-Leninist, like, I'm about as far from an ML as you could possibly get. I don't even particularly like the ideology, but I have a shitload more respect for it than the stuff that he attributes to MLism in order to just have an alibi for being fash. I mean, and now he has me sitting here saying, yeah, actually, Jason Unruhe, at least the bits that I'm seeing of this, he's getting it basically right. I haven't heard a criticism that I have any disagreement with yet in this. But of course, he's only showing us little bits. And the bits that he's picking do not actually help his position. They don't help his position at all. Jesus.
Since when is wanting more food to be produced during a global food crisis a right-wing position?
Since you're totally misrepresenting what the nature of the food crisis.
If that's a right-wing position, there is something really, really wrong. When Mao came to power in China, did he reduce the amount of food China?
Jesus Christ, that's not the same situation. That is not the same situation at all. Because when Mao came to power, the issue was agricultural self-sufficiency. The issue was China having enough agriculture going on to feed themselves. That was the same issue when the Bolsheviks came in Russia. That was the same thing, after the Japanese were kicked out of Korea. That is not the same thing. They're talking about agricultural self-sufficiency at a national level. We're talking about global food production, which has gone steadily up since that time, it's worth noting, and is at a point where we're making enough food, we're producing enough food for 10 billion people, when that's like almost 3 billion more people than we've even got. We can stand to reduce food production as long as everything that is produced actually ends up going to market, ends up getting actually to the retail level and distributed to people. We could stand to lose quite a bit more food production distributed over the full range of agricultural products, it's worth noting. As long as everything that was edible, that was produced, did in fact end up going to retail.
China had? No. When Stalin came to power in Russia, did he reduce the amount of food Russia had? No.
That's not a great example. Now, because, yeah, actually, the forced collectivization completely wrecked the harvest in 32-33. And then they lied about that, and there ended up being quite a bit less food, and then at various occasions with Stalin. And wait a second, why is he skipping over the Russia, like the whole Russian Revolution, the early Bolsheviks, and just going straight to Stalin? That is interesting.
In fact, you look at what the socialist countries of the world do. They push growth. They raise countries out of poverty.
That is, again, not the same thing. Because a lot of the time you're talking about countries that have been deliberately exploited externally because of colonization. And so they have so much of their economic activity is directed towards enriching companies and people in other countries that they have to actually catch up if they're going to try to put their economy to work for the people in their country. This is not the situation we're talking about at the global level. Come on.
With 5-year economic plans, socialist construction, Stakhanovism, they build these countries up. So if you think that wanting more food to be produced, not less, is somehow a right-wing position, oh boy, we got a problem here, Jason. I mean, if left-wing means making people poorer because global warming...
Except there's no reason that reducing food production would actually make people poorer. Unless the companies that control the food output continue to get to just throw half of it out in order to keep their fucking prices up. And yeah, the whole point, last I checked, of communism is that, yeah, the rich people end up a whole lot poorer because everything, all their shit, all their stolen wealth ends up being redistributed to everybody, and it belongs to everybody.
We got a problem.
And for them, the less said about Alexander Dugin, the better.
Yeah, well, that's an easy dunk. That's like, I mean, that is just bull. That's bowling a Yorker at a fucking tail ender right there.
So,
Dugin doesn't believe in historical progress. Dugin believes the past, present, and future are equal. So Dugin doesn't fit in with this at all. I don't think Dugin...
Well, I mean, you talk about historical progress, but every time you talk about what you want to do in the U.S., it's going back to the fucking 1930s and you're Senpai Roosevelt.
Dugin talks about degrowth. He doesn't talk about Malthusianism. That has nothing to do with Alexander Dugin.
No, actually, the Malthusianism, that's more LaRouche.
Have you ever read anything that Alexander Dugin ever wrote, Jason? Are you just like throwing his name in there because he's this big, scary Russian guy with a beard?
Who's like literally a fascist and who you suck up to?
Like you? I mean, do you know anything about Dugin? Dugin does not talk about this issue at all, as far as I can tell. Dugin is a...
Which doesn't mean anything because he does not actually seem to know much about any of the people he cites.
Conservative. He's a traditionalist in Russia. Like, Dugin is not on top of this stuff.
When he left the Nazbol party in Russia, the Nazbols moved to the left. He was a right-wing influence on an already fascist party.
I have not seen a statement from Dugin on the Dutch farmers. Dugin generally does not believe in historical progress. He's into postmodernism, and so Dugin has absolutely nothing to do with this, except that everyone who doesn't agree with the CNN position is a Nazi. I mean, that's basically what they think, right? They can't tell the difference between Dugin and LaRouche.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up LaRouche, because, yeah, this is definitely much more LaRouche, who also is a fascist, and is a really funny person to be so in sync with when you're also accusing other people of being CIA psyops. Because if you look at the history of the LaRouche organization in the world, whatever the CIA is doing in Latin America in particular, the LaRouche people are right there with them, doing the exact same shit, backing the exact same mass murderous death squad fucks.
And me, and Haas, and,
It's piss?
Venezuela and Cuba. It's like anyone who doesn't go along with the CNN narrative. We're all the same.
Yeah, that's it. All your critics just love the CNN narrative. We're just fucking Wolf Blitzer groupies. That's you got our number. I mean, he just keeps saying this shit and claiming that everybody who disagrees with him, everyone who criticizes all his fascist shit, all his just complete dishonesty, must just absolutely love U.S. imperialism. He never provides any examples. Even in the case of Vosh, where examples fucking abound. Okay? He never provides any examples of this for a very simple reason. His leftist critics fucking hate U.S. imperialism and have spoken against it in great detail and in with much greater ideological consistency than he's ever been able to muster, because we aren't trying to combine U.S. nationalism with some sort of fake-ass socialism that's actually just piss-weak social democracy.
And being a leftist just means you agree with CNN. CNN hates the Dutch farmers. So does Jason. Continue.
What do we have? We have Caleb Maupin and the rest of the usual suspects saying that this is an attempt to, this is for degrowth. This degrowth. They're trying to be the Malthusian.
Yes, actually.
Yeah, his point is, and he's quite right about this, that none of those things is actually true or even makes the slightest bit of sense if you understand a single one of the words in that fucking sentence.
They are trying to impose policies on the Dutch farmers that will reduce their crop output. And they will have less. They will produce less food. That is degrowth, Jason.
No, that is not degrowth.
Is degrowth.
To which now
he's never actually offered a definition of it. I mean, the closest he came was claiming that that growth in the phrase degrowth just refers to the amount of crops that are grown, which is not how that works, because he doesn't know what the hell degrowth is.